I'm Dave Trafford.
What a stupid son of a bitch.
And this is The Writ Race. Yeah, look at that. 12th day of May. Welcome in. It is The Writ Race. This is the daily version of On the Ledge, which is the Ontario Politics podcast. We drop it into the Daily Brief feed as well, so lots of places to access this show. And it's yesterday we had more than 400 downloads, which is a pretty good day for us. So thanks. There's a lot of you who are new to the program. You can always go back and listen to the back catalog. I noticed that many of you are, so good on you for that. Yeah, we're not really talking about chasing the horse race per se. We want to get back to, the hows and the whys of the campaign. So that's why we gather around the table with Sabrina and Angie. She is the founder and editor at the Queen's Park Observer. And John Wright has his finger on the pulse at Maru Public Opinion. And I just, as I kind of watched some of the developments yesterday on the campaign trail, and we had all talked about how are we going to break through, Sabrina, in terms of sort of making eye contact with some of those disaffected voters, those who are out there that might really have this sort of low simmer anger that might or might not have an effect on the campaign. It's interesting to see how there was a piece that was published, I think it was by the Post, and they were talking about the idea that, Premier Ford is probably one of the most unliked premiers across the country rather, but we're still ready to re-elect him here in Ontario. On the other hand, there was a piece that suggested, Ontario kind of does bland. I mean, look at Bill Davis and look at Dalton McGuinty. So maybe that will play in the favor of Stephen Del Duca. This is what it's come down to?
Yeah, it's been a bit of a snooze fest so far. I guess obviously we political nerds, which I assume many listeners here are, just like all of us on this panel, we're very tuned into this. But I think for the more general electorate, like my parents don't really follow politics as closely. They're not very enthused about this. And of course, that's how you get people out to the polls. So you're right. Bill Davis said boring works, and it certainly worked for Bill Davis. But I think that's kind of like what we're missing right now, is, a bold platform, promises. The Liberals have kind of been winning on that front. They've gotten the most, they've been, I think, in my view, the most successful at grabbing headlines, things like Buck a Ride, for better or worse, people talking about, a vaccine mandate for students. That's a very visceral issue, and a controversial one, of course. But, they're definitely winning the day when it comes to, getting us to talk about things. But at the end of the day, I think this is going to work in Doug Ford's favor. Like when we don't have such exciting opposition proposals, and the opposition parties, as I've said before, they tend to have difficulty getting their message out in comparison to someone like Doug Ford, who's a bull in a china shop politician. It just favors the status quo, so-called voter apathy. So this is all working out in Doug Ford's favor. Of course, it's still early days and campaigns matter. I'm still waiting for some brown envelopes to slide under my door. Some scandals. We had the former, I guess, because the legislature has dissolved, Education Minister Stephen Lecce, called out for so-called slave auctions from his fraternity days at Western. The premier hasn't been up to take questions. He'll be up later this morning, and I think this is probably he's going to get grilled on it. This has the power to suck up some oxygen for a few days, but we're still 21 days out from election day. I don't think this is really going to hurt them very much, and they're still sitting pretty. We also have the Greens platform coming out today, which includes some of the things that I think the opposition parties, the main ones, the NDP and the Liberals, have not been so successful at in terms of exciting or innovative policies. Yes, they're both promising to phase out for-profit long-term care, for instance, but the Greens are proposing something a little more innovative, I think, boosting the independence of the province's top doctor, oversight of long-term care. Everyone's kind of wanting to increase home care funding, and he's also going to be putting out some numbers on the greener economy, so I'll be parsing that later today. But I think we know, the Greens don't really have much of a shot at forming government. They might pick up a few more seats, but at the end of the day, I think, this is kind of a sleepwalk of a campaign so far.
Yeah, John, I think the idea that as Sabrina outlines it, it just kind of frames this whole notion that I've always had when I approach this stuff. We get the government we deserve. So the degree to which the electorate is engaged or gets involved is going to be reflective of the kind of government that we have. In a situation where there's a motivated electorate and there's a lot of visceral debate and it becomes protests, et cetera, the kind of things that you might see otherwise in other campaigns, there's more a sense of holding government to account afterwards once that vote happens. In this case, the voter apathy actually almost gives whatever party wins free rein. If they don't have to be accountable during a campaign, they can kind of do what they want once they're elected.
Yeah, and that's the case for every majority government that you're going to find. And I just want to go back to something you said at the outset, and that was that other people are saying that Doug Ford is not popular compared to the rest of the premiers, which is true. I mean, he's probably, out of all of the premiers, the third or fourth from the bottom of all of them. But that doesn't really matter. I mean, the reality is, even Bob Ray, in the first poll that I ever did in 1990 that was released publicly on a horse race, showed that he was going to win the government at 38%. Well, guess what? 37 to 40% gives you either a good majority or a massive majority, and the same is federally. So you can have 60% of people get up every morning, or 62% nowadays, and dislike everything that you do and still manage to get a majority government. So if you play by the numbers, you don't have to have a majority to get you a majority. Secondly, it's a very interesting circumstance this time out because the government hoisted the budget. I mean, they basically have taken the budget that was proposed and hoisted it until they get back into the legislature. It'll be interesting to see, Dave, whether or not they call the ledge back early, like they did after the last election campaign, and they got to work and then they kind of break for the summer, or whether they're going to wait a little bit longer. But in that context, they will either come in and pass as many things as they can, or they will come in and say, well, things are a little bit different now. We've got priorities for this and we not so much for that. There's different things that we've decided that may have to wait till later. So there's a timing issue. So in that sense, whatever the government does is going to be a direct response to the majority or minority that they get, because there'll be an immediate consequence that there's a budget that is hanging out there that we don't know whether or what is going to be passed from it, what's going to be influenced from the campaign. And it will depend probably only on about 37 to 40% of the people in this province.
I was looking at some of the other stuff that came up from the campaign trail yesterday, and this is like the daycare announcements we used to get every year from the federal government. Finally, they've managed to land the national plan of some sort, and that's taken decades to actually get to. But the other one that happens provincially is about insurance rates. And so I see yesterday where the NDP is talking about lowering your auto insurance rates by 40%. And my problem with that is it makes it sound like a pocketbook issue. And they somehow say we've got the highest rates and the lowest accident rates in the country. That's not the point, really. I think if you start to carve out 40% of your premium, guess what? At some point, your coverage reflects that. And I don't think there's enough education around. That's a dangerous thing to be doing, just throw out there, I think, particularly if we're talking about an electorate that really isn't paying attention. If we're just going to sell that top line 40% of your insurance rate, Sabrina, there needs to be a bigger discussion about, well, what happens if you get into a car accident and you have some traumatic injury? What exactly am I going to be able to count on from my insurance? And they never get to that stage in the conversation. It's a serious problem.
Yeah, and I think, when Andrea Horwath announced this in Brampton, which has some of the highest rates in the province, and, where there's a lot of close races, politically speaking, also a lot of seats up for grabs, she also said this, that, this is not a gimmick. It's not a gimmick. But she couldn't really answer, a lot of the nitty gritty details of this on the policy side, and just kind of pointed us reporters to the backgrounder. So there's a lot of questions about this, but yeah, I guess the headline promise is, a 40% reduction in auto insurance rates, a ban on increases for 18 months. But she also says that they're going to, establish a commission that would investigate and recommend, changes to the system. So it's going to be a big overhaul. But of course, that does kind of leave a lot of questions about what that system would look like, you may be making it a fully private system instead of like a government run system, that type of thing. And something the NDP has also been saying for a long time is they want to end the so-called postal code discrimination, where depending on where you live in the province, you might pay a higher rate. Like I said, that's kind of what's happening in the 905 and Brampton. And this is like everyone's favorite stretch goal, I think. Every government, every party has promised to address auto insurance rates. Even the Conservatives, who have been targeting motorists as, wanting to get their vote this time around, they kind of had some vague stuff in the budget / pre-election platform about, looking at the system, that type of thing. So there's definitely a lot of questions about this one. The Liberals, former Premier Kathleen Wynne, she had, promised a reduction by 15% in 2015. That never happened. And she basically admitted it was a stretch goal. So I think, I don't know how closely voters are going to be looking at this. And I guess the onus is on us as journalists to kind of help explain it to them. But, I still have questions about the policy and the details of it. Instead, Andrea Horwath was just kind of up there, telling us it's not a gimmick, but couldn't quite answer, the detailed questions of this.
Well, and I think that is always, in the weeds stuff is really, oddly enough to me, it's the shiny thing that tends to take over the debate so often, John. But it's way more complicated than just saying we're going to cut your rates and we're going to have an independent commission overlook some of how this is administered. The fact of the matter is, if when you need your insurance, it's not there to help you get along because you can't work anymore or whatever traumatic disability you may have. That in and of itself is a greater cost to our economy than the cost of the insurance that I'm paying on a monthly basis.
Yeah, a couple of things, though. I mean, this is not a shiny thing anymore, is it? I mean, every election campaign, we hear from all of the parties what they're going to do. In fact, even the Conservatives decided what they were going to do in the last election campaign, and I don't think anybody could tell you exactly what it was or whether it was successful or not. This is trot out all the time. So it's part of the wallpaper. I think the second thing, though, is it's not an immediate concern to anybody. It may fit into the affordability category, but it's not something which is driving opinion at the moment. I think you said it at the outset, Dave, and that is that if you take a look at what the Conservatives are doing right now, they're on cruise control. I mean, there's nothing really there that they need to do. If you look at the Abacus research, which is out this morning, great piece of work by David Coletta on the horse race and also on, whether people are going to be voting one way or the other way on different issues. What you find is the real issue is between the NDP and the Liberals. That's where the switchers are going to be. And if Del Duca can, in fact, consolidate his vote, taking away from Andrea Horwath, as we talked about yesterday, she's obviously got some internal party issues around her leadership, which is on election night going to become self-evident. But if Del Duca is able to consolidate around that, then you get a good, solid opposition from the Liberal Party. But other than that, there's nothing piercing the bubble at the moment, nothing at all. And it's just very regionalized around the 905, and that's pretty well it.
Well, even at that, though, I was talking to a group that's trying to organize a candidates, not really a debate because they're looking at various candidates from different ridings, but representing all the major parties. And they are having an impossible time getting a Tory to show up to these things. And I understand why. I mean, I get that they don't want to do that. But I begin to wonder, there was a time, Sabrina, when the riding debate or that, that town hall discussion where all the candidates were there played a role in this education process that you're talking about. It really provided an opportunity to say, here in High Park, we have these issues that we really do want to have addressed. You lose that. So if the Tories don't want to come to play, or the governing party doesn't want to come to play, I begin to wonder whether or not, the whole idea of riding debates or candidate debates have any role at all anymore in an election campaign.
Well, I think, maybe for certain stakeholders, it's kind of an opportunity even to talk about like specific issues. I know, Operation Black Vote Canada, they tend to have, town hall style debates. In the last election, Doug Ford skipped out on that one. But it gives like an opportunity to address like issues too, and also issues that are important to that specific riding. But at the end of the day, like we don't vote for our leaders, not technically, not really. Obviously, they play a huge part in how people cast their ballots. But if, with that whole NDP insurgency that's in the works with Horvath, the 901 Club, I mean, a lot of dippers that I spoke with were like, well, I really like my local candidate, but I have a problem with Horvath. It's the opposite is actually what we're seeing in the polls at large. But and I think, there's a strategy there too. Like obviously the Conservatives, they are the governing party. People have bones to pick with them over the pandemic, over the autism file, disability benefits. So I think, it runs the risk of also, having protesters there, people, calling out your party, and then to put that on a candidate to address that is a huge liability, politically speaking. I think that also is just kind of the MO from the Conservatives. Like the Liberals too don't have a campaign bus for media, but neither do the Conservatives. And one theory kicking around is that the Liberals just can't afford it. Third place party, they haven't done so hot in fundraising as in previous rounds. The Conservatives, that's not the case. They boast the biggest cash arsenal, but we're not. We don't. Media doesn't have reserved seats on the so-called Yes Express that Doug Ford is taking around the province. So there's some strategy to that. It's a tactic. Like it's going to change campaign coverage. For instance, the NDP is the only one doing it. They're getting a lot more headlines. Maybe than they would, because the Liberals, their policies are very good at grabbing headlines just in general. But for the Conservatives, it means that it's not going to be the press gallery that's on the bus following Doug Ford, trying to nail him on some of the bigger, accountability issues. It means that they'll probably get more local coverage. So this is all a big strategy, and one, but of course it has the ability to backfire. I was speaking to Wyatt Sharp, the Cub reporter. I think he's 13. I can't remember his exact age, but he's a young reporter. He's fun to do interviews, and a lot of politicians and leaders, go on his show, and it's a fun thing for them to do. Of course, he asks great questions and holds them accountable. But he was saying to me that the only party he hasn't heard from was from the Conservatives, and I think that might it would have been a good look for Doug Ford to do an interview with someone like Wyatt Sharp, but it seems like even he can't nail down the premier. So welcome to the club, Wyatt, I guess.
Well, and I think that it's easy to point to an electorate that's disaffected or we're too busy or whatever. But the parties, John, have slowly shaped this whole new culture around election campaigns. And what's really accelerated it, from my perspective, has been the pandemic. We have become used to, tolerant of, this sort of once in a while conversation with whoever we want to talk to, or we allow them to drive the agenda entirely. Either way, it's not a good thing. It's not like Sabrina can wander down the hall to somebody's office and knock on the door and just hit them up with a question for clarity on something. That culture has gone away. It's not like the days even 10 years ago.
Yeah, there's a couple of things, though, that have shaped it. Number one, of course, is COVID. I mean, try and put together 800 people or 500 people in a room, and you're not going to have everybody comfortable in doing that. Secondly, though, Dave, what we've seen is like I remember back again, as I said yesterday, I seem so ancient, but being a parliamentary intern in the 1981 campaign and going around to these different debates, both with Leader Davis and the other leaders, plus local constituencies. I mean, the most intimidating thing was you took somebody and you stuck them in the front row who basically made eyeballs and, with the candidate that you were opposing and said a few things that were hoping to rattle them. But you didn't have massive crowds that were stacked into a room screaming and yelling. I mean, during those days, you did have people who screamed and yelled, but they were there because they had legitimate reason to do so. As I said yesterday, in 1981, it was the collapse of a trust company, which grabbed huge headlines and put people, out of their life savings. And the government was supposed to be responsible for that. There was an inquiry through the Administration of Justice Committee that I sat through many hours listening to, and not much changes. But those people would show up, scream and yell. Today, I wouldn't want to go to a local candidates meeting. Well, what's the point? I mean, you end up in a room stacked with everybody's screaming and yelling people who are just going to drown out somebody, and it's not going to be nice for anybody to have a debate. Well, ironically, last night watching the Conservative debate, yes, I watched it, for the federal party, Tom Clark held everybody quietly. The decorum was calm. You got some things out of it, maybe, but you had an impression of the candidates because you were genuinely interested as to how they might play off against, Pierre Poilievre and maybe a couple of others. Like, you got a sense of who they were because you didn't really know them. Going into an all candidates meeting nowadays, you got to do the phalanx of getting in the door, which is going to be through the protesters who might be there protesting autism and a whole bunch of other things, long-term care, to being in the hall, which is then stacked. Man, oh man, if there's ever a good decision by a campaign nowadays, if you're in the government and you're running a cruise control campaign, and you're actually running ahead of everybody else, stay home. Like, just what's the point in going out? So I think in some ways, the parties themselves have diminished the whole nature of the town hall. They've done it themselves. And then stakeholder groups who are around the key issues of the day, have done it. We're not seeing the same, anything like what Jagmeet Singh put up with in Peterborough yesterday. Like, absolutely not. But that's what we've got to in this society. Like, who wants to be part of that, even when you're on the outside? I'd rather just stay home, even if some of these issues meant a lot to me.
I thought that was brilliant last night.
Yeah.
I don't know. We've known Tom Clark for a long time. And he and I were seatmates on a couple of the campaign planes, in fact. So, watching him last night, he's the right guy in terms of this, just to pivot to the federal Conservatives. But, the idea of trying to control the debate and moderate the debate, I think is really important. And we're heading into that phase on Monday night provincially. So, I begin to wonder. I listened to the debate from North Bay, and the one thing that occurred to me, and we already commented on Mike Schreiner and his performance, but clearly the one thing that occurred to me is that he is the only one on that podium that didn't have a hearing problem, because he heard the questions and he answered the questions. So, Sabrina, on when the leaders get together, and Steve Paikin, there's nobody better at it than Steve, but this seems to be the only place where we're going to be able to hold them to account. And sometimes the format gets in the way, where, we'll have this basic question. We got so much time. They rag the puck, run out the clock, and they don't have to answer the question. And somewhere between that and being aggressive, overly aggressive, but, that seems to be the only place where we've got the opportunity to hold them to account, to answer this bloody question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll be there on the floor and, eating my proverbial popcorn. Althea Raj is going to be there too. She asks the tough questions as well. I think a lot of folks are going to be tuned in on the North Bay debate. This is, on prime time, 6:30 p.m. on TVO. But we're also just hearing now that Doug Ford will be able to bring his notes with him. And that's something the other party leaders felt shouldn't be allowed. You should be able to speak candidly. off the cuff. All the parties, the back rooms, the war rooms, they do debate prep with their leaders. And so it's been a criticism of Doug Ford previously that he reads off a teleprompter. He's got his staff giving him cues at his press conferences, smile here, maybe cool it on this, that type of thing. But Doug Ford does the best when he's off the cuff. Like we were kind of talking about how he had some awkward phrasing during the North Bay debate. But I think, it tends to work in his favor. The people that are rallying, crying against that, that just kind of tends to galvanize his base, and it's red meat for his own supporters. It paints him as an everyman. So I think, that could backfire for Doug Ford to have his notes with him if he's sounding a bit more robotic, reading off of something. But you're right, I think there's going to be a challenge for the moderators to get these guys off their talking points. And I hope it doesn't turn into, question period, which actually I think these days is a little, it's not as, exciting and organic as it was before. Like the opposition parties and the government, they kind of share their questions across, they give it to the speaker ahead of time. It's a lot more planned and choreographed than it is organic. And so I'm kind of hoping that things get a little more natural next week. And of course, when these guys are fired up, like campaigns are emotional events, and so I think we might get a chance to get them off their talking points.
So if we look at the debate being on the Monday night then, John, and we know that so much of the reaction is critical in terms of the outcome or how people perceive this and whether or not there's any kind of effect as a result. They wait for analysis the next morning. So what are we, Wednesday, Thursday, before we begin to see some kind of, shift one way or the other?
Yeah, likely, but I think what you may see is a very different dynamic in the debate, in the sense that you're going to have the NDP and the Liberal attacking each other as opposed to attacking Doug Ford. I mean, that's where the rubber's going to meet the road for both of those parties. They're going to realize by that time that the PCs are in good position, that they've gone up maybe one or down 1 point from the outset of the campaign, so they're pretty rock solid. So the debate is really about the two of them, in order to, grind down each other's side, make sure that people are going to vote for them and not for the other, so that they can form the official opposition. It will soon be heard, and probably in that debate many times, is looking square on the camera and saying, look, if you want to stop Doug Ford, you're going to have to do it through me. Like the opposition party are going to say, don't vote for that party over here. They're just going to, it's not going to have any impact. Vote over with me. NDP come and join the Liberals. Same thing with the Liberals joining the NDP. That's what you're going to hear, because that's the only pathway forward they have in order to diminish in any way, shape, or form the size of the majority that the Conservatives are going to get. So I think that'll be the different tone. Whereas this time it was kind of like, go after the front runner. By that time, you're not going to see any slippage probably, and it's going to be after each other in order to create as many points as possible in order to get the biggest opposition that they can.
So that means to me then that if that will be the focus, that clearly Friday, Saturday, Sunday will be very quiet days on the campaign trail. There will be little public facing for any of the leaders because, as you point out, Sabrina, they're in prep mode. But that's a significant chunk of the time away from the campaign where, I realize there's a ground game that's going on behind the scenes and all that kind of stuff, but the leaders don't have to be present for the next 3 or 4 days.
Yeah, I think that's the theory. We've been getting itineraries from the NDP, the Greens, and the Liberals. Doug Ford's camp has been less, helpful with that. No, they haven't been releasing much itinerary, but I think, we can expect maybe a little more quiet news. It's felt like it's been go on the campaign so far, but certainly they'll be prepping their leaders, doing mock debates, which like my kingdom to be a fly on the wall there. You'd have maybe some staffers pretending to be the other leaders, someone pretending to be Steve Paikin, but you know what, this stuff matters. I do think debates matter. There's not much, I guess the polls are telling us there's not much, desire for change right now, or as much as we've seen in previous elections. And so I think that this could swing some people who might not be decided, some people who think, I'm not sure if I even want to vote. I think this will certainly get people paying attention. And we're coming down to the wire. Like as of today, we're just 21 days out. And like you said, this is probably going to be the only chance that we get all four of them on the stage. So the stakes are big. We expect Stephen Del Duca to try to brand himself as the new face of a new Liberal Party, as his opponents try to tie him to Kathleen Wynne and the unpopular previous liberal governments. Andrea Horwath is going to try to position herself as government in waiting, and Doug Ford's going to say, look, like we've gotten us this far, let's not rock the boat, steady as she goes. And Green leader Mike Schreiner is going to try to pick up certainly some support, and I think he's going to be someone to watch. I know we've said a lot of positive things about Schreiner, but it's significant. The first time a Green will be on the stage, the debate stage, because he has a seat in the House. So the stakes are really high for everybody, I think.
Well, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how all of this plays out, particularly with Schreiner on the dais there, John. Yeah,
I think the one thing also that we have to watch for now is the advertising campaigns. Campaigns are always staged. I mean, you have your momentum that you want to look at, and if things are going south, you start to load in the public advertising. I'm not talking about the Facebook and all the other social media stuff. It's the more public stuff. But this is the time when I suspect over the next 24 or so hours that you're going to have the Conservatives start to put the thumb down on the advertising against the Liberals and the NDP. But you're going to start hearing all of a sudden that wake-up call to, remember Kathleen Wynne, remember this guy is running in, he was there. Because now what you're doing is you're solidifying your lead. You're bringing people, before they make that final decision, you're bringing them right back to where you want them to be. And that is to say, look, it's a safe bet with us. Just hold the show and let's keep moving forward. You're going to have candidates at the door who are going to be, stepping up their whole approach to when they knock on a door, what their lines are going to be going into the final 3 weeks of the campaign. So it's a bit of a different tone that starts now, Dave. And the Conservatives have the most money, and the Conservatives have the most advantage in terms of laying down that final carpet bombing. I suspect we're going to start to hear that very shortly as they start to manage into the final 3 weeks of this campaign.
All right, well, let's leave it there. We'll be back at it again tomorrow. It is the Writ Race, and it'll be John Wright will be here, along with Sabrina Nanji, and Keith Leslie will join the roundtable discussion coming up on your Friday edition of the Writ Race for Story Studio Network.